Just imagine, it's a quiet Tuesday afternoon in Mars Bluff, South Carolina. March 11th, 1958. You've got kids playing in the yard. Their dad, Walter Gregg, is tinkering in his garage. It's just a totally, completely normal day. And then, in a blink, it's not. A deafening roar just shatters the peace, and the world turns into this scene of pure chaos, described in Walter's own chilling words. When the smoke finally cleared, this is what was left in the Gregg family's backyard. We're talking just feet from where those kids had been playing. A crater. And I don't mean just a little hole. This was a chasm, almost 40 feet deep, that's 11 meters, and over 20 meters wide. A huge chunk of their world was just violently ripped away. The blast wave, absolutely devastating. The family's house was just shattered, walls blown out, roof caved in. Walter Gregg, his wife, their 3 children, a nephew. All of them were injured by flying debris. Their home, their safety, everything they had, just gone in an instant. So, the question is obvious, right? What on earth could do this? This isn't a war zone. This is a sleepy little town in South Carolina. Well, the answer wasn't on the ground. It was about 15,000 feet straight up in the air. And to really get what happened, we need to zoom out a bit. Back to the 1950s, the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union was at its absolute peak. And this wasn't some abstract political thing. It was a constant, tense standoff that was literally playing out in the skies above everyone's heads. You see, the U.S. strategy at the time was to keep a fleet of B-47 Stratojet bombers in the air 24/7. And these weren't empty planes. They were armed with nuclear weapons, ready to strike back at a moment's notice. The plane that flew over Mars Bluff was part of exactly one of these training missions. This one was codenamed Operation Snow Flurry. It was a super high-stakes, incredibly high-risk plan to keep the peace by threatening total annihilation. But here's the thing. Keeping nuclear bombs flying around the clock is an insanely dangerous game. You've got this massive, complex system where one tiny error, one little malfunction, one moment of just plain human mistake can turn a routine exercise into an absolute catastrophe. And that is exactly what happened on that B-47. Okay, so you gotta hear this because the chain of events is almost hard to believe. A warning light flashes on the dash. There's an issue with the pin holding the bomb in place. So the captain, Bruce Kolka, goes into the bomb bay to check it out. He's reaching up, trying to fix the pin on this massive weapon, and he loses his balance. So he reaches out to steady himself. And what does he grab? The one thing he shouldn't have, the emergency release handle. Just like that, the 4-ton Mark 6 atomic bomb drops and falls right through the bomb bay doors. Can you even imagine the sheer panic? Kolka himself almost got sucked out of the plane with the bomb. The crew barely managed to grab him in time. But any relief they felt vanished in a split second, replaced by pure horror as they watched a nuclear weapon tumble out of their plane, heading right for American soil. So back in Mars Bluff, the Gregg family had no clue that their entire world was about to be turned upside down by a single mistake made miles above their heads. Now they had to deal with the fallout. And an official story that, well, didn't exactly line up with what really happened. And this is where the story gets really troubling. The official line and the actual truth were two very, very different things. The Air Force told the public, don't worry, it was just an inactive practice bomb, no nuclear material on board. But years later, the crew actually found Walter Gregg and confessed the truth. The nuclear core, the plutonium pit that makes an atom bomb go boom, was right there on the plane with them. The danger that day was so much greater than anyone was told. Now, the Air Force did take responsibility and paid the Gregg family compensation. The amount was $54,000. In 1958, that was a lot of money. It's about $600,000 today. But when you've lost your home, your possessions, your peace of mind, it wasn't even close to enough to rebuild what was taken from them. And that feeling, that sense of injustice, it left a scar that never really healed. You know, the physical injuries got better, but the emotional wounds didn't. Walter Gregg's daughter, Helen, said that the whole incident and feeling like they were shortchanged for their loss stayed with her father for his entire life. It became this permanent source of anger for him. Okay, so this brings us to the million-dollar question. If the nuclear core was on the plane, why wasn't a huge chunk of South Carolina just vaporized? How in the world did we get so lucky that day? Well, the answer comes down to a really critical safety feature. See, the bomb was what's called unarmed. The plutonium core was definitely on the plane, but it wasn't physically inserted into the bomb itself. It was carried separately in this special shielded container they called a bird cage. So when the bomb hit the ground, the conventional explosives inside it went off. That's what made that massive crater. But without the nuclear core in place, the nuclear chain reaction, it just couldn't start. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, wow, what a 1 in a million freak accident. But here's the terrifying part. It wasn't. As we're about to find out, this was nowhere near an isolated incident. It was part of a deeply disturbing pattern. So the military actually has a code name for this kind of thing, broken arrow. It's their term for an accident involving a nuclear weapon. And officially, between 1950 and 1980, there were 32 of them. 32 times a nuke was lost, dropped, or caught in a fire or explosion. The near miss at Mars Bluff was just one piece of a much scarier puzzle. And some of these were just harrowing. Off of Tybee Island, Georgia, a mid-air collision forced a plane to drop a hydrogen bomb, a weapon 100 times more powerful than Hiroshima's. They never found it. It's still down there in the water somewhere to this day. Then in Spain, a B-52 crashed and scattered 4 thermonuclear bombs, leading to a massive radioactive cleanup. Same thing in Greenland, 4 more H-bombs lost under the ice. But maybe the most terrifying close call of all happened in Goldsboro, North Carolina. In 1961, a B-52 literally broke apart in midair over Goldsboro, dropping 2 hydrogen bombs. As one of them fell, it went through almost its entire arming sequence. Investigators later found that only a single, simple, low-voltage switch, the very last safety measure, after all the others had failed, was all that prevented a full-scale thermonuclear explosion on American soil. Just one switch. Let's just try to wrap our heads around the kind of power we're talking about here. The bomb that fell on Mars Bluff, already twice as powerful as the one dropped on Hiroshima, but the bomb that almost went off over Goldsboro was more than 260 times more powerful than Hiroshima's. A blast on that scale would have made a huge portion of the East Coast completely uninhabitable. All of these incidents, these terrifyingly close calls, they were a massive wake-up call. The crater in Mars Bluff, the radioactive contamination in Spain, they were all sending a clear, silent warning that something had to change, and fast. And thankfully, things did change. That whole practice of 24/7 airborne nuclear patrols, it was finally stopped in 1968. Bomb locking mechanisms were redesigned to be way more secure. Protocols for handling the weapons got much tighter. And, maybe most importantly, direct communication lines, like the famous red telephone, were set up between the US and the Soviet Union, just to make sure an accident couldn't be mistaken for an attack and accidentally kick off World War III. If you were to go to Mars Bluff today, you wouldn't find some big fortified monument. You'd just find a quiet pond in the middle of the woods. The crater filled up with water over the years. The only things that tell you what happened here are a simple little plaque and a wooden cutout showing the size of the bomb. And that kind of brings us to the final thought, doesn't it? The crater is peaceful now, just a part of the landscape. But the story it tells is anything but. It's a stark reminder that even the most powerful, most sophisticated technology we ever create is still vulnerable to a simple broken pin, or just one person losing their balance at the wrong moment. So the real question is, more than 65 years later, are we really listening to its warning? Thank you so much for joining me for this one. If you found this story as fascinating and honestly as unsettling as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories you only thought you knew. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that final question in the comments below.